Hi, and welcome to another episode of This is Vinyl. I'm Mark Hobrat, and today we are going to talk a little bit about one of the most iconic record labels I think have ever existed. For me, they epitomize everything that is brilliant about a label in terms of the breadth of talent that they signed and the way that they've grown year on year from a very small start in 1959 right up to the present day, where they're currently one of Universal Records' biggest record labels. I'm delighted to say that Neil Storey is joining us today. Neil was a press officer for Island Records for many years, famously dealing with artists from Bob Marley to Grace Jones and many, many others in between. He'll talk to you a bit about them, I'm sure. So he also has a great book out at the moment detailing all the releases for Island Records from the late 60s into the early 70s. So delighted to say that Neil Storey's joined us today. Neil, welcome to This is Vinyl. This is another This is Vinyl little scoop here. We're sitting talking to Neil Storey. Neil variously works. I first met Neil when you were at Arista Records, I believe, when I sat on the floor to talk to you about a press officer's job, and you ended up packing me off with a whole load of Patti Smith albums, which I will be forever grateful. But Neil worked for an awfully long time at Island Records, which is one of the labels I really want to explore in the podcast, because talking about seminal record labels, they don't come much more seminal or respected than Island, in my opinion. And I think there's a reason for that. You worked there for quite a long time, but why do you think Island in particular has a special place in a lot of people's hearts as a label?
Ooh, God, you started with difficult questions. I thought there might be an easy one. I can't answer that because everybody has a particular place in their heart for a particular label. It is extraordinary, however, that as a label, it is collected. It is, so far as I'm aware, it's the most collected label on the planet.
Yeah.
And the most important within those collectibles are the Pink Label albums and 45s, because the Pink Label, oddly enough, didn't actually last particularly long. It was about 18 months, something like that.
Well,
18 months, no, 20 months, something along those lines. So I think it's loved purely because of one thing, and that is that Island, as a company, by and large, believed in the acts that they signed. They didn't always sign the right people. That's, we can go into that at some point, which were the really awful signings that they made. However, they believed in people, whereby this day and age, you can't compare anything, but in time past, it would be a 2-album deal, it would maybe be a 3-album deal. And if you take somebody like, just as a for instance, you take somebody like Robert Palmer, it took 4 albums, nearly 5 albums, before he actually was making any kind of a return for the label. Why did they believe in him? They believed in him. And eventually it all came good. But they gave him the time, the space to create in the way that he was able to create. They gave people studio time, by the creation of Basing Street, having Basing Street, and then later the Fallout Shelter over in Hammersmith, Compass Point, Nassau. It wasn't free, but it meant that you could actually go to place X or place Y and work without actually having the worry of the clock ticking the whole time. So people were given budgets, obviously, but people were also given time and space to create. And it was all about the creation of music.
That's a great point, because it didn't really occur to me until you just mentioned it, that actually having ownership of a studio allows you to have that kind of creativity, because if you're not paying a third party astronomical studio fees the whole time and you're controlling that, and you can place your artist in, okay, that you're right, there's a monetary value put onto it for the artist. There has to be, I guess, but that would explain a great deal about why Island would allow artists to develop. So I don't think everybody had that. I guess EMI would have had it with Abbey Road a little bit.
Well, they would, but Abbey Road was, don't forget that you had at the helm of Ireland, you had a man who produced records. You had, at that time, you had Sir Joseph Lockwood, you had Jerry Ord, who were head of EMI. They didn't produce records.
Yeah, they just owned.
And there's a huge, huge, huge difference there. And you have somebody who actually understands a lot better the creative process than, you know, Abbey Road in those days, it was men in white coats.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I remember talking to Chris Blackwell when we were doing the Island 50 campaign about a couple of the signings that he made. There's two I remember very well. One is Bob Marley that he talks about, and one is Grace Jones. The Grace Jones story, what you've just reminded me of is the studio time where he actually put the band together for her record, and I think you were involved in the whole marketing and the press for around that as well. But he
certainly involved in the whole press thing. But what he did do was with the first record, John Paul Good had actually taken the picture that was going to be the cover, and what Chris did was he had that blown up huge, and it was pasted to one wall in Compass Point. And this is the record you guys are making. So he has all these disparate musicians around, none of whom, don't forget, had worked together. So you got Barry Reynolds from Marianne's band. And I mean, Barry, believe it or not, Barry was originally in Blodwyn Pig.
right.
But you didn't know that. Yep, he was. And various other bands. You've got Wally Badarou, who's doing his synth keyboardy type stuff from Paris. You've got Sly and Robbie, you've got Sticky. God, who else? I can't remember now off the top of my head, but easy enough to look up. But you've got all these people who didn't really know each other. And then you've got Grace doing what Grace does. And you've got people like Nick Stewart, Bill Stewart, the man who signed U2. He's sending over suggestions of songs for them to record. And that's how Private Life came about. That's how I think one of the B-52s suggested another couple of songs, but that's how all that happened.
That's incredible. And you, obviously, I remember when a lot of people won't remember this, but Grace ended up on, was it the Russell Harty show where she punched?
Oh God, and, yes! Don't hit me.
You talking to me about the reaction to in the record company the next day?
Well, it was mayhem actually, because for some reason or other. And I don't know why this was. Don't forget, this is long before, you could channel hop in the way that we nowadays channel hop. That you can have something streaming on your laptop. This was like four channels on TV, and that was about it. And if you wanted to watch something when something else was going on, you had to record it. Inevitably, that would go pear-shaped. Anyway, what with one thing and another. I drove into work that day. I hadn't seen the Russell Harty thing the night before. I don't know why I hadn't, but I hadn't. Your artists are on. Surely you're going to. But there was some reason I'd been out for dinner, or I'd been over to see my mum, or whatever it was. I hadn't seen it. Anyway, so I go into the office the next again morning, and the phones are ringing off the fucking hook, like nothing on earth. And it's like, what happened? What happened? What happened? And somebody came in and said, did you see it? And I went, no. Grace swiped, what's his bloke with, what was the chap name? What was his name? No, it wasn't. She didn't swipe. Did she swipe Harty, or was it the bloke with the inflatable, whatever it was?
Can't remember.
Anyway. There was a fight. Yeah. And I think not Elmo. What the heck was it? I'll think of it in a minute anyway. And it just went nuts. It absolutely went nuts. But the thing is that Grace was not like that, really. She wasn't. She had this persona of being ultra scary, with the military haircut and she'd fix you with these kind of steely eyes and drawl, slowly at you. She had all these kind of, and they're more like defense mechanisms than anything else, because underneath all of that is a really very sweet very caring, very nice person, oddly enough.
But so your job the next day, I'm guessing, was just fielding reporter after reporter to ask what was going on. But
Well, yeah, basically they wanted to know what had happened. So I had to kind of brush up a bit. And of course, there's no internet in those days. There's no mobile phones. There's none of this, the ways of communicating that we're used to nowadays. So it was very analog and it wasn't particularly digital.
did that have a huge effect on the record sales after that?
God, did it?
I just wondering whether that
It had a big effect on Grace's reputation.
yeah, I guess.
Huge effect on that. And suddenly she was this bad black woman, striking white people. There was a lot of that kind of, ooh, you can't do this. But I mean, was she out of control? No, of course she wasn't out of control.
She's great.
No, it was fantastic. I mean, it happened. Was it a setup? I suppose is the next question. Not that I'm aware of. I don't believe there was anything set up to actually create that to happen. But she was a fiery character.
Still is.
I saw her not very long ago, oddly enough.
Yeah. Well, actually, Louis Elliott that I signed for guitarist with Kinky Machine years ago, he's playing guitar for her now, which is.
Oh, really? Yeah. Yeah. Well, we were lucky enough to be in Jamaica in May, and she suddenly appeared one evening, and she was just the same, just the same. And she has this sort of aura around her of, oh crikey, it's Grace. But at the same point, she'd gone off swimming, came back. I mean, what age is she? 70 something now. She looks amazing. Just the same, just the same.
But, I mean, another artist I mentioned before was Bob Marley, and one of the interesting things I seem to remember Chris talking about was it resonated with me because it brought up this question of trust, which is in your artist, which is another thing I think that Island had probably more than other labels. He was telling me the story about Bob Marley coming in to see him, and he cut a check for him and just said, there you go and record an album and bring that back to me and let's have a listen. Or I'm probably paraphrasing a little bit, but trusted him to go away and do it. And a lot of people are saying, like, you're mad. Why have you just given a reggae artist a load of money? You'll never see that again. And Chris was adamant that because he decided to trust Bob with this, that was why the album came back, and that was why it was it was so good. Were you party to any of that?
Well, oddly enough, we were lucky enough to spend quite a bit of time with him in the last few months. He's told me that story in amplified detail. It happened not long after, and nobody can be quite sure. There's a lot of water under the bridge, but nobody can be quite sure how many days, or even if it was the same day, that Jimmy Cliff had announced that he was going to be not staying with Island, he was going to sign to EMI. And everybody was very upset. Chris was very upset about that. And at that time, let's just call it at that time, there was a call from somebody, nobody can remember who. There was a call from somebody saying, could Chris make time for a meeting with Bob and Peter and Bunny because they were stranded. They needed to get back to Jamaica. Maybe he could find a way of helping them out. And maybe, who knows, but have a conversation. And that's exactly what happened. What you've said is 100% right. And it's all about instinct. And he felt there was a trust thing there. And that's why he cut them the check. The check was cut immediately there and then.
Yeah.
And it was, people vary about the amount. Was it $5,000 or was it 10,000? I believe it was 10. And it was, you've got these songs, come back, make a record. We'll go back to Jamaica, make a record. I'll come over in 3 months' time or whatever it was. We'll meet up and let's see how things are gone. But that's enough to get you back and to actually start the beginning process of cutting a record. And the record was Catch a Fire, as we know, and it was as good as it was, but it wasn't 100% right. And then the next stage was actually to bring it the masters back to Basing Street, and that's where Rabbit put on his keyboard bits, and that's where the guy from Smith Perkins and Smith, he put on Wayne Perkins, he put on his guitar parts. He didn't know, he didn't understand what reggae was. He didn't get the fact that you're playing on the off the whole time. He couldn't figure that bit out. But you listen to that guitar solo at the end of that, it's enough to make you cry.
Mm.
It really is. It's 3 octaves, and it's controlled. I don't know how the hell they got that, but that's that take. And in a way that was the first time people had heard reggae in that respect. I mean, that was my first introduction, for what it's worth. That was my first introduction to Bob, because I was working at EMI at that time, and EMI distributed Ireland. So every month we would have a sales meeting, and it was at the King's Head. Was it the Nag's Head? The King's Head. The King's Head in Horsham in Sussex. And on hot days, we were allowed to take our ties off and our jackets off. We all had to wear suits. And this was, I can't remember what time of the year it was anyway, but a guy called Fred Cantrell turned up, and he was the island sales manager at that point. And I was kind of like the lowest of the lowest of the low at EMI in their sales force. And that track, Concrete Jungle, was the first track he played. And he had a white label of it, and he put it on this kind of, wasn't a dancette in the kind of little conference room. It actually was stereo, although you'd be hard pressed to tell it was stereo. And it was cranked up to as high as it could actually go without it just distorting like fuck. Anyway, played this one song, and everybody was passed, the sleeve was passed around, and everybody was saying, this is not going to sell. This is not reggae as we know it. If it's reggae, then the album cover has to have a naked woman on it. Why isn't it coming out on Trojan? And, all of this stuff. And I sat there and I was listening to this, and I thought, fuck, this is music from outer space. I've never heard anything like it in my life before. And that was the very first time that I'd encountered anything like that. So that's where I go back to with that. And the story of Bob is the story of Bob. Everybody knows it.
That's exactly the kind of thing that I want people to understand. Is there is a story behind every piece of vinyl that somebody is holding in their hand. There's a story behind it.
Yeah.
And
there always is. I mean, whatever the cover is, well, oddly enough, when I was with Chris, he had something pinned to the back of his door. He doesn't live at a very, what's the word? I mean, the building that he lives in at Goldeneye isn't particularly ostentatious. It's actually quite small, and it's just very, whatever it is anyway. His study, and he has a big sort of deck outside, so you can sit outside. But at the back of the door, CNN is on the whole time, and at the back of the door was this kind of poster kind of thing, and he showed it to me, and he said this was the original cover for Catch a Fire. I didn't even know it existed. And he said, I had a guy who did it. He said, we didn't use it. And I said, well, yeah, no, the Zippo sleeve was the one. And he went, no, this was the original one. But he said, they look like thugs. And that's why I decided not to use it. So how clever was that?
Brilliant. No, he's an amazing man. I remember interviewing him for Island 50, and I know he doesn't really like to be filmed very much, but we got permission to do it because we were doing it for a lot of the students, and he was okay with that, because it was like the next wave of people coming into the industry, and he was happy to talk to them about. I remember going to his office in Notting Hill, and his PA going, "What are you doing with the camera? He's not going to see you." Like, well, I have got an email from him here says that he's okay with this. Eventually, we managed to get through. And I remember just wearing a T-shirt that just said, "Look after the planet is where I keep my stuff." And sat there in a pair of flip-flops on a sofa with traffic noise going past that we couldn't really edit out. But it was just, and I sat there for an hour and a half with him with the biggest, cheesiest grin on my face going, "I'm getting paid for this." And I'm just listening to Chris talk. He one of the things he talked about, and again with one of the things I think that makes Island Records so special, he talked about the power of the voice and how, because I asked him if there was a thread really that ran through anything with Island Records, and he thought about it and thought, if anything, it may be the voice. And you go back, you mentioned Robert Palmer, but then you think about Steve Winwood, you think about Free, and right up to Amy Winehouse and Keane, and you can sort of see that there is this one thing that maybe attracts them. Would you?
I totally agree with that. I'd expand it a little bit more. I think at one point, I mean, Joe Cocker was almost signed to Island, but for reasons that are very, very long, very complicated to go into, it didn't work because nobody could get him out of the contract that Denny Cordell had signed him to. So if you look at it, Millie, in a funny sort of way, starts it because she's got that little squeaky voice. And he figured cleverly, nobody's going to last more than 2 minutes. So this song has to be 1 minute 58 or whatever. And that's what it came in at. Through Millie, he met the Spencer Davis Group. He saw the Spencer Davis Group. He saw Steve. Ray Charles on Helium.
Yeah.
You think about it. And he was 15, he was 16, something like that. I mean, he wasn't any older, that's for sure. Then you have Free, you have Paul Rodgers. Then you have Jess Roden coming out of the Alan Bown, Bronco, and then the solo material, who is right up there with all of the rest of them. Then you have Mike Harrison from the Spookies. What a voice was that? But that goes back to the VIPs. And Chris saw them play in Hamburg, and they were playing in the next door club on the Reeperbahn to where Spencer Davis Group were playing. So you got it right. So then we move on a little bit. And then the Sandy Denny. There's no other voice like hers. I mean, it was just, the word unique is used far too often. Then you've got Come Back, and then you've got Robert Palmer, because you've got Robert also coming out of the Alan Bown. The Alan Bown was signed. Chris signed them. Not that he particularly wanted the Alan Bown. He's quite candid about this, but he wanted Robert. So Robert then leaves the Alan Bown, goes off and founds, goes into Dada, and then that becomes Vinegar Joe. So Vinegar Joe got signed. But you also had two singers there. You had Elkie and you had Robert. Elkie's background goes way, 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 way back. Then you have John Martin. Did anybody else sing like John? One World, albums like that, Solidaire. They were just that slurred vocal. Nobody else was doing anything like that. Then you have somebody like Nick Drake. Did anybody else sing like Nick? No. They really, really didn't. So you're right. You can go right on the way through. Marianne Faithfull. Anybody sound like Marianne? No. Incredible series of vocalists who were all signed to Island. Grace is another one. Nobody sounded like Grace.
Brian Ferry was there for a bit.
Brian Ferry. I'm trying to think of who else had that kind of, the voice was the immediate bit that you got. I'm not sure that Ferry was in that respect or maybe he was, but with Roxy, it was more the overall, as opposed Sparks were the same. It was more the overall. Bad Company, it was more the overall. But the first three albums, that was a different thing entirely.
Oh, completely. I mean, Fire and Water for me is one of my favorite records. And holy grail as a collector for me for a little while was to get an Island Pink, the first press. And to my regret, there's a lady came into the shop a few years ago now. I didn't really have a load of money to spend on records, and she brought me in a copy of Fire and Water in pristine copy on the Pink label, signed by all 4 members of the band.
Oh, really? Wow.
Get this. And she said, well, my girlfriend was going out with Paul Kossoff when this record came out, and they played at Dunelm House in Durham, which is a student union in Durham. I was the ent manager there after, a long time after Free. And she said, so I took my copy down and with her, and we went and met them afterwards, and they signed it. And I said, well, can you just write that down for me in a letter and sign it and date it? So how much do you want for the album? So I want £200 for it. And at the time I was thinking, well, I want it. I can't really part with 200 quid right now for that. So I said to her, okay, well, look, why don't I sell it for you? You take the first £200, and then whatever we make after that, we'll split, and we'll get you more than the 200. But I can't, and I had it for a while, so I kind of had it in my possession for a little bit, but I did have to sell it. I think we got nearly £1,000 for that record. Wow. But I wish I'd kept it. God, I wish I'd kept it.
The problem is you'll never see another one.
No, exactly. Certainly not signed by all 4 members above their picture on the sleeve. But that's the beauty, I think, of collecting vinyl. It's that you never know when something like that's going to turn up and just and happen upon you. I've learned now that when it does, just nab it.
Nab it while you can. The guy who took that picture, Hiroshi Yoda is his name, although he's only credited as Hiroshi on the back of the cover, only did 2 album covers ever. And they were both done, oddly enough, for Island. The other one is John and Beverly Martin, Stormbringer. And he shot that on Parliament Hill. And I spoke to him, he's in Tokyo, just on the edge of Tokyo. Very, very nice man, very polite man. And he told me that the reason he never shot any other album covers was that Free was so stoned, so out of it, that he couldn't get any kind of movement out of them whatsoever. And they sat there for an hour, and he was clicking away through his Rolleiflex. And then they left, and they turned up really, really, really late. That he decided he'd had enough of pop groups, as he called them. He did not know until very many years later that actually that cover was part of a very successful album, because he went on to work in fashion and the rest of it.
Yeah. No, great record. Wonder if I could track down the guy I sold it to. Yeah.
Maybe he sold it on.
No, he wanted it. He was a Free fan. I sold it through an auction site. And
right.
He was a massive fan. I had 2 or 3 people that were wanting it, and he was just kind of, it didn't really matter to him what he spent on it. He had to have it.
Wow.
And fair play. I mean,
yeah.
In your experience with Island Records, I mean, we concentrate on Island quite a bit, but do you think there are some highly sought after releases that you would advise me as a collector to say, well, look out for these guys, because if these come your way, you should try and get one?
Anything with the Pink label is collectible. It really is. I mean, you've only got to go on Discogs and you'll see the prices that, a decent copy of Course of the Crimson King, or even the Best of Traffic, or whatever it is, records that actually sold a lot of copies. But for some reason or other, you don't find them around. People just got rid of them, anything with a very, there was an awful lot of gatefold covers at that time. Fotheringay, Bronco, Spooky Tooth, and why the reissues of that suddenly became a single cover is completely beyond me. Spooky Tooth. I mean, there were 5 different versions of that. You'll know all this anyway. Blue one, the purple one, the brown one, the green one, and the whatever grey one.
Mm.
Some of them have weathered better than others. My favourite's still the purple, but and though things like that that was in my view, that was almost the golden era of Ireland. Um, and pretty much everything that came out, even, I mean, damn it, you know, I don't know about you, but I certainly didn't find myself rushing home to listen to a Quintessence record. However, the covers are extraordinary and they're very collectible. So, it's anything from that era that is pink and before that as well. Those are the early stuff up till 1968, 59 to 68. The early stuff, the 4 albums that Chris released in Jamaica, the Ernest Ranglin, the Owen Gray, the Lance Hayward up to, they're as rare as hen's teeth. I mean, they really are rare,
Yeah.
really rare.
But the thing I loved about Ireland as well, I don't think many labels did this, but there were the compilation albums count. We Can All Join In. Was that? Yeah, was that one? Wasn't it? Well, I've got that on a pink label, but that opened up so many doors for me. I kind of got it by accident years and years and years ago, and fell in love with pretty much every act on there.
Same with Nice Enough Sweet. Same with Bumpers.
Yeah.
Although Bumpers came, and they all came out in different kind of variations around bits of Europe and Australia. But you're right. I mean, the other thing about those, one needs to kind of investigate them a bit. And that's part and parcel of what we've been doing on for volume 2 of the book. But on, oh, I'd need to look this up to be exact on it. But anyway, there is, I think it's on Nice Enough to Eat, but there is a version of a free track there that is completely different to the release one on the album.
So that's interesting. So actually, if you want to find different little versions, because I don't remember. I mean, Stiff Records did live stiffs and stuff like that, but the one Nation ended up doing an album.
No, this was the golden era of samplers. There's no question about it. And also, at that time, not people were buying records. Do you remember Chris Needs, the journalist who edited Zigzag?
Yeah.
Okay, Chris and I spoke on, I think it was Thursday or Friday last week. And he was saying everybody in the playground had a copy of You Can All Join In. And I said, really? And he went, yeah, it's all we could afford.
Yeah.
But from that, you got to hear all this incredible music, Nice Enough to Eat, all under £1. Viv Albertine is exactly the same. What was it? This is a long time ago, and I talked to her about it. And she said she said, I saw one in a charity shop the other day. And I said, what was that like? And she said, it was like seeing an old friend.
Yeah. that was actually that got me into Island Records. That got me into kind of wanting to explore more about what was on this label. It was like a gold mine. It was like this theme. At the time, I was buying punk and new wave. I loved the Beatles. Kind of Patti Smith, stuff like that. But it was kind of quite a revelation to me that all of this was in one place. And I wanted to know more about why this is. And when I was lucky enough to work with Island Records for quite a while, just as a kind of a hired hand, if you like. It's like being a kid in a candy shop, And when we were working with Island 50, and this box arrived at my house, which was a box of CDs with 50 different CDs in it for Island 50, and all ranging from all of the seminal releases which had been just redone for this celebration, which is kind of an extension of the compilation albums or the samplers. It was a bit like, here's a celebration of everything that we've done in 50 years, and stunning. But I felt so privileged to just be able to have all this stuff at my fingertips, and it's still, to me, it's still, it's sort of pinch me moment, to actually have been there. I just wish I'd kept more than I did. Yeah.
I really do.
Yeah. There you go. And away from Island Records, I mean, you've not only worked for Island Records. I mean, I say we first met when I think I contacted you to say it's from my mate Stan, who who at the time was working for Vox, and he said, "Go and see Neil Storey and see if there's any jobs going." And you very kindly saw me, and there wasn't any jobs going in the press office, but I told you about how much I loved Patti Smith, and you went, "Well, here you go then," and you pulled out all of this vinyl and loaded me up with it. I've still got it. I'd actually bought some of it, but the first album of hers I bought was Way. But working with another artist like Patti Smith, she's, to me, one of the most important artists that I've ever experienced. What was that like to work with her on?
I didn't actually have that much to do with her, to be quite truthful. However, I did briefly work with, this is the Arista days. So I did work with one of my heroes at that time, and that was the Four Tops.
Right, yeah.
And, because being a little bit older, I grew up with the Four Tops on the radio, on the transistor, jammed to my ear. And what with one thing and another, Clive signed them, and they came over and they had a record on a film. It was the film with Phil Collins in, and he played the bloke who was in the Great Train Robbery, who was the flower seller. Anyway, can't remember his name. Anyway, so they had a song on that became a hit.
Yeah.
And so they arrive, and there's various bits of promo, and they're going to do a couple of gigs in London and da-di-da-di-da. And so they're staying at the Savoy. Where else are they going to be staying? Of course, they're staying at the Savoy. So anyway, I'm summoned to meet them, and I'm kind of quaking in a funny sort of way. I suppose perhaps if you were to meet Patti Smith, then it might be the same feeling, that you hold these people in a degree of awe.
Did was
You really do. I mean, it's like, right, what the hell am I going to say to them? And anyway, so I go in, and they're doing whatever they're doing in the room that we used to use for the Mercury Music Prize when that was held at the Savoy. I forget the name of the room now. Anyway, but it's kind of a long walk from one side to the other. It's like you're walking down a cricket pitch. And I can see the four of them, and they're all looking immaculate. They're all dressed exactly the same. It's like they've got stage costume on. Anyway, the first one moves across, and he says, "Neil, it's a pleasure to meet you. My name is Levi Stubbs. This is the Four Tops."
Wow.
And you don't know what to say. They must have done this a million times, but it was that sort of southern gentlemanly charm, and immediately you're put at your ease. It was the most extraordinary thing. Arista days, also working with Dion DiMucci. Dion was the guy who gave up his seat on the plane that Buddy Holly went down on. Think about that. So you're just sitting there one-on-one chatting to him about stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, how often does that happen? So it's this awe-inspiring thing of, that suddenly you're meeting people who you've read about or you've listened to, pretty much all your life, and then you're actually physically working with them. I mean, I don't know, our kids, they won't have all of that kind of stuff, I don't think.
No, it was the same when we were working the re-releases for the Patti Smith albums when they all came out on CD, and promotional work on it. And I got a call to say that Patti was doing a small gig at the Serpentine Gallery in London, and it was I can't remember, there was 100 or 150 invited audience, and would I like a couple of tickets? Well, yes, I would like a couple of tickets. I remember going down there and being, I don't know, 10 feet away from her. Well, she played a semi-acoustic set. Lenny Kaye was there. It felt to me like it lasted 20 minutes. It was probably an hour and a half. And then I met her afterwards, and I genuinely, it's the only time this has ever happened to me. I've met God knows how many artists, have always got on very well with the majority of them, but I couldn't speak. I literally couldn't speak, you know.
I know that feeling. I really do, and it is extraordinary.
Yeah.
You know, you're in a position where you really want to, and I can tell you another one. When I was managing, will not name who I was managing, but anyway, he got not shortlisted. He did get an award for the South Bank Awards. Another Savoy thing. This was, so it's all done over a lunch at the Savoy, and everybody's sitting down, and we're all on this kind of round table, and the seat next to me is free. And I'm thinking, wonder, maybe it's somebody who's just not bothered to turn up. But this is kind of a prestigious thing. Anyway, what with one thing and another, a guy arrives, he's wrapped, he's got about 4 scarves around his neck. You can just about see his eyes and his hair. And I think, fuck me, it can't be. And it was. And it was Ray Davies. Now, Ray Davies, in my view, wrote possibly the greatest song of all time, which is Waterloo Sunset. So we sit there and he says, hello, my name is Ray. And I kind of look at him and I go, yeah, fairly familiar. Lovely chap.
Yeah.
All I wanted to do was ask him about that one song. That's all I wanted to do. And I couldn't bring myself to do it. However, we spent the entirety of lunch, talking about the dearth of the great British commentator. from cricket commentators like John Arlott and, you know, that Richie Benaud and all of that kind of era. Richie Benaud, obviously, is not English, but you know what I mean? It was the dearth of the great British commentator, Kenneth Wilson and people like that. And all I wanted to do was ask him about Waterloo Sunset.
Yeah.
Never did it. A bit like you and Patti Smith.
Actually, with Ray Davies, we recorded in Conk a couple of times, and he would quite regularly come in. There was a massive snooker table in Conk Studios, which was his. And of course, he played on it quite a lot, so he was quite good. None of us lot knew on earth we were doing on a full-size snooker table, and I swear to God, I think if he was probably parading around thinking, I'll probably have a few quid off these guys if I play this right. But lovely man, yeah, really.
Yeah, he was charming, absolutely charming, and but that's how it gets sometimes, isn't it?
Yeah. Interestingly, we had I obviously run an antiques and vintage shop as well. How it was part of how this came about, but we had Celebrity Antiques Road Trip came to film in our shop last week, and I didn't know who the celebrities were going to be. It's the show is 2 antique specialists rock up in a classic car, usually a little sports car or something, and they have to buy items from shops and then sell them at an auction, try and make a profit.
Yeah, I've seen them. I've seen the program. Yeah,
charity. So the Celebrity Antiques thing, we were filming last Sunday, and they came into the shop. And I said to the crew, "So, who are the celebrities coming in? I don't know who they're going to be, but I kind of need to, because it's someone from Love Island or a soap opera. So I'm not going to know, and I need to, understand who they are." And this quite young guy turned around to me and said, "Well, it's some guy called Alexi Sale, and he's with the guy, what's his name, Nigel Planer." And I was like, "The young ones?
What?
Are you kidding me?" And I spent a happy day last Sunday with Alexi.
God, you would have done.
Buying antiques in my shop, being filmed, and me standing there next to Neil from the Young Ones. At some point, someone asked me a question. He went, "Yeah," and I'm standing next to Neil. So yeah, it's just there are moments like that. I always kind of, that always happened in the music industry. You were in the right locations and circumstances. You're going to meet these people, from time to time. But running a antique shop in the middle of Northumberland, I never expected to kind of encounter the 2 of the young ones.
Lex is fantastic. I worked a lot with him, and he's not so much with Nigel Planer, but Lex was. Well, he's bike mad. That's the other thing, as in Tour de France, bike mad, which of course is my other love in life. So we just spend all our time talking about bikes and bike races.
at one point he picked up it was a French duck, a wooden duck, a decoy, and he had one in each hand, and he started shouting at them in Spanish. And Nigel Planer walked up and in Spanish as well said to Alexi, why are you shouting at those ducks in Spanish? And in Spanish he's responding going, because I can't find any antiques here and I need to know what I'm doing. And the crew were in bits, I was in bits, and they're going to have to subtitle this. I'll let you know when it comes out. You have to subtitle
Please, I'd love to see that. That's fantastic.
Very funny. Well, I'm going to wrap this up. I have one more question which I'm asking everybody.
Yeah.
And assuming for 1 second that you've got a fine record collection behind you, I can see it on the screen here. I'm assuming there's either a flood or a fire or something. You've got time to rescue one record. What would it be, and why? It's a horrible question.
It would have to be a record that one would go back to time and time and time and time again. So if it was a single album, it would probably be Brighter Later. Nick Drake's Brighter Later. I spoke to John Wood. It is the first album in volume 3 of the books. And I spoke to John Wood about it a while ago. And I said, is there an album that you've ever recorded that upon which you would not change anything? And he went, there is. I went, really? What's that? And he went, Brighter Later. I would not change a thing. It is as good as it humanly can get. And I thought, that's interesting. I think it's the one I could return to time and time and time and time again. If it were not that, it would be Bumpers, probably, because there's not a lot wrong with most of the tracks on there. And also it includes Northern Sky, which is the equal #1 song ever written, as far as I'm concerned. So that's the answer. It would almost certainly be Brighter Later if I had to. But, I've got quite big arms, so I can actually probably grab a few more. Yeah. I mean, there's some special ones in there, but but you know what? It's like each time you go to play something, then something happens, and there's something you either hear anew or something you hear afresh. And I don't know. I mean, would it be music from Big Pink? That's another one that it's not an island record, but it's another one that I could live with for the rest of my life. And I just had that one album because it's as long as it's a stereo version, not the mono version.
Definitely.
What's everybody else said, just out of curiosity?
Oh, there was a combination of stuff. I mean, Mark Lewis was London Calling by The Clash.
Mm-hmm.
What was John Mostyn's? I'm trying to remember what his was. God, I can't remember. I've done 2 or 3 of these recently. I'd have to research, but I remember Mark's was London Calling. And what was Mike Smith's? I genuinely can't remember, but I'm going to do a little compilation of a lot of these that people are saying. So just at the end, so I'm going to do Spotify playlists for This Is Vinyl, and one of the playlists will be,
That's great. That's a great idea. That's a really good idea. Really, really, really good. So.
But Neil, I'm in awe of everything you've done. I think the book is fantastic. What's the book? Just so everyone can hear. See, Island Records, Booker Records, 1959 to 69.
1959 to 68. The new one is 1969 and 1970. That one there is free forklift truck with every copy delivered. That's 392 pages. The new one we're coming in around about 440, and that's just 2 years.
That's amazing. I'm going to have to get me copies of both of those. Thank you.
Strongly recommend.
Yeah, thank you ever so much for agreeing to talk to us. It's great. But again, thank you ever so much, Neil Storey. This podcast was presented by Mark Hobra, produced by Swansfield Music. It was edited by James Gray for Kinetic Studios. Title music is Stoner Punk, published by Boost Music and Lift Music. Copyright 2024.